This day is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Make another smart choice with Auto Quote Explorer to compare rates from multiple car insurance companies all at once. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates, not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avergan. Well, it is Christmas Eve, a day in which many are tucked away cozily inside, but also a day in which maybe you've gone to a Christmas party at someone's house, or recently you've gone to a party after work, had a glass of eggnog or two or some champagne, and then perhaps, or a lot of people do, get into their car and drive home. The holiday season is the high season for drunk driving. Between Thanksgiving and New Year's and, yes, Christmas, you see huge spikes in drunk driving fatalities, and so forth. So let's go to 1982, where this really became a critical issue, and it is the origins of National Impaired Driving Prevention Month. December is National Impaired Driving Prevention Month, when this country really did start to make a dent in the scourge of drunk driving. And it represents a fascinating mix of grassroots efforts, community groups, government programs, and good old-fashioned personal responsibility. Who knew? All of those things can work together if the issue is important enough, it seems. So, here, as always, to discuss, Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
Yeah, we are interested in this as a kind of example of how lots of different forces and groups can come together to address a critical issue, something that doesn't feel like we're very good at these days. But why don't we actually just go to like some of the context for how bad it is in December when it comes to drunk driving stats and kind of people getting behind the wheel when they're a little buzzed or impaired.
I mean, it's pretty terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about this week between Christmas and New Year's Eve, over a third of the fatalities all throughout the year happen during that time, so that are alcohol related. So you got about 1,000 fatalities during that one sort of stretch of several days. And that's been up since 2010. In 2010, it was about 750 fatalities. Now it's higher. And federal studies have also shown that during those weekends, and this is what's crazy to me, 1 out of 10 motorists are intoxicated. 1 out of 10. But only 1 out of 2,000 get arrested.
Yeah. And we should point out, like, you know, what counts as intoxicated is a huge part of this, right? And a lot of this is defining the blood alcohol level and working those rules. But it is pretty stunning.
I think that stat that Kellie said is particularly poignant too. That more than 31% of the deaths between Christmas and New Year's Eve are alcohol related, and how hard death is in that period. I mean, it's always hard when someone dies, but especially when it's around the holidays. And a third of them are possibly preventable. Mm-hmm. It seems like something that would spur people to action, as it does in the story we're telling today. Yeah,
and, you know, these are deaths, obviously, of the drivers who get in accidents, but then also pedestrians and other people in other cars. I should also add some context that you noted, Kellie. I think largely speaking, the story is since the 80s, which we'll go to in a second, you know, we've really sort of tamped these numbers down. They have spiked a little bit recently. My sense is like traffic fatalities are up, accidents are up. A lot of this is just kind of a vestige of COVID, when like one of the things that happened during COVID was just America forgot how to fucking drive and then hit the road again. And you saw all sorts of like accidents and fatalities and pedestrian fatalities and so forth go up. The other dynamic here more recently, which is really interesting, is the kind of rise of rideshare and Uber and so forth. And honestly, like one of the most compelling arguments I've ever heard for the rise of Uber is that it means that when you're buzzed, you don't have to get in a car. And especially for places that don't have good public transportation, it has really kind of provided that service. So, you know, that's part of the dynamic.
That's the one thing that's hard to, though, sort of like square, because you have all of these rideshare options, and yet there's been a spike from 2010 until now. And so you have more reason than any before to just get a taxi, get a Lyft, get an Uber, whatever it is. And people aren't making use of those options.
I think part of it is that Uber and Lyft in communities around the country don't really become popular and accessible until around the time of the pandemic. And so you might be seeing some offset with Uber and Lyft, but it's being masked by the much higher.
And as we'll see throughout the story, people are stubborn,
and they're drunk. You don't make good decisions when you're drunk.
No, you don't.
Right.
And if you've got surge pricing during New Year's Eve, I mean, I don't know if you've ever tried to take an Uber in Times Square. Like, that's not going to happen. Yeah. So no one's going to pay $100 for that.
Also, one more caveat before we go to the 1980s. It is also enormous trucks that are just deadlier. That cause more deaths just from cars in general. But let's go to the 1980s.
Right. The size of cars has gotten bigger, so one accident has much dire consequences now.
For sure.
Okay, so let's go to December 1982. Ronald Reagan is president, and Ronald Reagan sort of takes up this cause and starts to really address the scourge of drunk driving in this country. What does Reagan say, and who's he roping into this?
So he's coming out right at the start of the holiday season, or I guess midway through the holiday season, December 13th, 1982. He comes forward to sort of follow up on some work he'd done earlier in creating a presidential commission on drunk driving. And he talks about drunk driving as a solvable problem. He says for too many years, people have approached the problem of drunken driving as an unavoidable disaster like hurricanes or floods. And it's like, no, it's not. Like, we can actually just act differently and end what he calls the scourge of drunk driving. And he's doing this not because Reagan had a particular interest in this topic or this problem, but because there had been, over the 2 years prior, this enormous grassroots women-led movement organized by a group called Mothers Against Drunk Driving, known as MAD. It was founded in 1980 by Candace Leitner after her daughter, who was just 13, was killed by a drunk driver. And they began lobbying legislators across the country and say, you have to do something to make there be a cost to drunk driving. And I think that that's kind of the one thing that is the other kind of background to this, which is people drove drunk all the time, and there wasn't a social stigma against it, and there weren't really laws against it necessarily. Yeah. You watch those old episodes of Mad Men where Don Draper just takes his cocktail into the car with him. Yeah. My uncle would drive around with a beer in the car before the 1980s because that was just that wasn't regulated in any meaningful way. And so this is a big push for new regulation.
Yeah, I would say, maybe the 60s and 70s or 50s and 60s is the sort of high watermark for drunk driving and fatalities. High gin mark. And they had been kind of coming down by about a third since the 60s into the 80s. But, these numbers were still kind of astounding. Like in 1980, it's over 50,000 deaths on the nation's highway. Not all of those drunk driving. And, we should point out that in the 70s is also when the 60s and 70s when the seatbelt movement really takes off, and then airbags and so forth. But at the same time, cars are getting faster and heavier and more deadly. So it's just this sort of swirl of different forces. But
yeah, it seems like you can't. Every time there is an intervention, there is something else that combats that intervention that's being made. So sure, you've got seatbelts, but you've got bigger cars, or you've got all of these other competing issues that are keeping people from staying safe.
Also worth pointing out, the drinking age at this point is 18. It doesn't get raised until 21. Actually, it's part of Reagan's sort of re-election campaign. He finally comes around and endorses that. But that's certainly part of the issue here as well. Hey, it's Jody, and as you likely know, it is the Radiotopia fundraiser right now, and more specifically, it is nearing the end of the Radiotopia fundraiser. Now, before you throw confetti in the air to celebrate, I do have to say there is still time for those of you who have not supported to become members of Radiotopia. And we have a goal of 2,024 donors before the end of the year. We are just about halfway there, so some work to do. If you are one of those hang around and see kind of people, now is the time. If you're listening to the sentence that I'm speaking right now, take a moment to think about what that means. It means you're the kind of person who likes this show enough that you are still listening to a fundraiser pitch let me look at my watch here, about 27 seconds into this thing. That probably means you like this show and you like the work that I and NIki and Kellie, not to mention Jacob and Brittany and Kala, do. By supporting, you're helping us make exactly the show we want, but also casting a vote for independent media, which needs all of the help it can get right now. $20, $5 a month, $10 a month, $7,000 a month. Figured I'd throw that out there just in case. Anything you can do to go from listener to supporter at whatever level works for you, it means so much. And as a token of our gratitude, when you donate today, you will also get access to the list of our favorite things curated by me and all of the producers at Radiotopia. It is actually a pretty incredible collection of recommendations. So head on over to radiotopia.fm/donate to donate today. Write a little note saying you're supporting this day. Once again, that's radiotopia.fm/donate. And thank you so much.
We want to tell you about another podcast from PRX called Monumental. This podcast explores questions about the past, present, and future of U.S. monuments, uncovering the stories about what and who is important, as well as the stories that have been left out. Join host Ashley Seaford across the country with their team of journalists. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
This day is brought to you by Mint Mobile. Here's a resolution as we end one year and start a new one. Stop paying so much for your monthly wireless plan. Seriously, have you looked at your bill lately? I have. And after months and months of thinking to myself, man, this feels really high, I finally gave Mint Mobile a shot. Their premium wireless plans start at $15 a month. Just to be clear, I am saying 15, 1-5. The secret is that they do it all online. So they're not setting up retail stores or salespeople or anything. They are just laser focused on taking a little bit of your money and giving you great wireless service in return. I switched from one of the big three providers. It was a super easy process, and I was up and running. High-speed data, unlimited talk and text, 5G, all that stuff. But now, when I get my wireless bill, I don't want to throw my phone out the window. So, turn a new leaf heading into the new year. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month unlimited wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/thisday. That's mintmobile.com/thisday. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/thisday. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower than 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. There is legislation that is sort of paired with Reagan's statement and sort of putting a focus on this. So there's the Howard Barnes Alcohol Traffic Safety Law, which provides grants to states for enforcement, but it also lowers the blood alcohol concentration limits nationwide. They passed these 0.1% blood alcohol concentration laws, which is down from 0.15. In a lot of states now it is 0.08, and then there's this push now even to go lower to around 0.05. Somewhere in that between that 0.05, 0.08 into 0.1 is actually like where you kind of have this line between I've had a couple sips and I'm okay and like severe impairment. So like we're still kind of finding that line and doing all these other efforts.
And because it's so different for everyone. I mean, my 2 glasses might be fine. Someone else's might be like, to take them completely over the top. And so, and you don't really know height, weight. There's all these different factors that go into what can make a person impaired and what has a person completely fine.
So that's gets at exactly, I think, what's the interesting sort of swirl here of how the enforcement takes place, which is you can draw these lines that are sort of not arbitrary. They draw these lines that are kind of across everyone. But as you said, a lot of this also comes down to sort of individual reaction, individual choice, that good old-fashioned personal responsibility, which Reagan liked to talk about, societal norms. So kind of what is your sense of the mix of all of those and how they all did seem to kind of come together at a point in the same direction?
So it hits right at the tension in the conservative movement between libertarians and people who want to regulate society more. And so for somebody like Reagan, when he's coming in the 1970s and becomes president in 1981, he had been opposed to a lot of the safety regulations around vehicles. So, airbags, seatbelts. He was like, why take away our freedom to bash our heads against the windshield? And it really, that's why I think it's important that there was this big movement behind it and the legislature was pushing it, because Reagan himself was not necessarily inclined toward this. The thing I think that made him inclined toward it, in addition to this grassroots movement of people who he saw as potentially a large part of his coalition, was that it did slot in with something that Reagan was very pro and not very libertarian about, which was crime. Right. If this could be positioned not as public safety, but as we need to get these criminals off the street, suddenly Reagan is like, libertarian, what? No, we're going to lock them up. And so I think that that's one of the ways that he squares his opposition to the safety regulations, but his support for punishing drunk drivers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in that remark that we quoted from a little bit, December 13th, 1982, Reagan says, Americans want those who threaten their public safety to be held accountable for their actions. So you hear some of that kind of language that you're talking about creep in.
And you start to see some of the laws change in terms of having your license suspended, serving jail time, especially if there's fatalities involved, paying large fines or fees in order to get your license back. There are things that I think that punitively act as a deterrent in some instances to keep people from drinking and driving, but even those laws vary from state to state depending upon the circumstances.
Yeah, and I'm sure there are people listening who kind of have researched this or know this, but it is really fascinating to kind of dig a little into the kind of literature around what is effective in this regard, and a lot of it is just like you kind of have to try these awareness campaigns, the societal norms, but then some of the punitive action does work. And I've read some stuff recently just about how really severe jail times for first offenses, or taking away someone's car, suspending their license immediately, or putting in the breathalyzers. But it's it's a somewhat analogous, I think, to the gun debate, which is you can try and mitigate someone from drinking, or you can take away the thing that will lead to real harm, which is the car, right? And so I think it's interesting to watch kind of the approach from all angles. But I certainly think part of it is it's a lot harder to consistently address someone who has a drinking problem, but just take away their ability to use a weapon, in this case a car, that could harm others.
And in a broader, more long-term solution, if you cut down on car dependency, then it created more alternatives for people.
Can we talk about trains? Can we talk about Ubers, public transportation? I mean,
but also buses, right? To have some way that you can get home for $3 instead of an Uber, which during surge pricing is going to cost you $50. Giving people more better options so that they're not even driving to the place that they're drinking to begin with would be a big long-term possibility.
Yeah. So this also, of course, makes me think of kind of the way that this country really, smoking has been just cut in sort of remarkable ways in this country. We've done an episode. Maybe we'll rerun that soon. We're doing some reruns over the New Year's break. Maybe we'll rerun that episode about smoking, because it really was same sort of thing. This fascinating mix of some policy initiatives, but also some real social stigma, right? The norms change. There's less smoking going on sort of TV and in movies, but also if you want to smoke, you have to go stand in this stupid little box, 50 feet outside the door. There's just a sort of social element to that also starts to change things. And I think that's analogous here too, that it just becomes less cool, or it becomes more frowned upon to kind of be buzzed and grab your car keys.
And even maybe somewhat generational, because I guess growing up as a child in the 80s, smoking, not wearing a seatbelt, drunk driving, drugs, these things were highly stigmatized. There's no way I get in a car and I'm not putting on my seatbelt.
Right.
I don't even feel safe without a seatbelt.
I feel we're the first generation to really kind of feel that.
Yes, absolutely, for sure.
But I also think that one of the things that we've seen recently is that the upcoming generations drink a lot less, and that Americans in general are slowing down on their drinking. The issue is that the people who aren't slowing down on their drinking are drinking a lot.
Yes.
And so the problem drinkers are not necessarily shrinking in number, but the casual drinkers are.
All right. Well, I should point out the effectiveness of this. I mean, I won't read you a bunch of stats, but basically between 1980 and 2020, motor vehicle fatalities are basically cut in half, and I mean, there's fluctuations here and there, but it really is a kind of pretty remarkable effectiveness. And again, there's still a long ways to go. And that's why I think part of the conversation about kind of changing BAC laws and having more punitive laws and then providing alternative transportation, all of those are sort of continuing and are really important. As we end, I want to take a step back and return to something that Reagan said and kind of talk a little bit about the sort of political lessons of this moment. Because you read from NIki, but Reagan says, for too many years, people have approached the problem of drunken driving as an unavoidable disaster like hurricanes or floods. Well, we've learned that's not the case. We've learned we're not helpless. Reagan is the president who said, famously, Americans keep looking to government for the answer, but government is the problem, right? Mm-hmm. So to hear him say this, to me, is pretty amazing. I mean, it proves to me that even Reagan, who kind of, I think, cast the modern Republican die of like, government is the problem, not the solution. Even him, in moments, he can turn around and say, you know what? No, for issues like this, government does play a role. And, it seems to me like he could have just as easily led a statement about gun violence or poverty with that same thing. We've treated it as a natural disaster, but it's not. There's something we can do. So I don't know. I'm just struck by the fact that when he needs to, he can find a justification for the role of government.
He can pivot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he definitely had a flexibility when it came to political ideology and political popularity. And I think this is one of those moments where we see that is he feels the popular groundswell for this. And I think it moves him in a way that, again, has had profound consequences. Half the number of drunk driving fatalities, that's hundreds of thousands of lives saved over the last 45 years. That's not so bad.
Yeah.
And obviously we're seeing this kind of political conversation and divide and sort of philosophical and tactical divide playing out right now in 2024 as we enter Trump 2.0. Like, he's someone who I think understands, when you want to give people what they want, all of a sudden government's there and they can do things. But he's facing a lot of people who are saying no, the famous drown it in the bathtub kind of thing is still out there. And a lot of people are saying, nope, don't fund anything, don't do anything. And I think it'll be interesting. All right. Well, we'll leave it there. I don't know. Is this a good Christmas Eve topic? I felt a little.
Can I just say that it's
a little relevant.
Let's end on a lightning round.
Yeah, please. Okay, bring this home.
I love a good mocktail. Can we talk about mocktails?
Let's talk mocktails. I was going to ask
you. Eggnog doesn't have to have rum in it, right?
That's right. Your eggnog, you can
with cinnamon in it.
You really don't necessarily need it. I mean, I don't know. I've had some really fun, fruity mocktails that do make the drinking experience enjoyable without having to be intoxicated. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah. Or just get Blotto at home.
That's right.
Put on the Santa costume and shove some presents under the trees and pass.
Have your own private Santa con at home.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, anyway, Merry Christmas, everyone. Happy holidays. Nicole Hammer, thanks to you as always.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Okay, let me see if this is anything. If you instead of calling it virgin eggnog, you just say you're raw dawing your eggnog.
No.
Absolutely not.
That's a hard no from me.
Radiotopia.